are on location here at the Catholic Marketing Network, Somerset, New Jersey, joined on set by an old friend of ours, Russ Shaw, author of yet another book, this one entitled American Church, The Remarkable Rise, Meteoric Fall, and Uncertain Future of Catholicism in America. And welcome once again.
Good to be with you.
Thanks you could find the time to join us here. Now, how many books have you written over the years?
That's number 21.
Number 21.
Number 21.
Okay, and this is on the American Church. What prompted you to write this? Was this your own idea? Someone approached you about it, or what?
Well, I often said, and truthfully, that I probably started writing this book 40 years ago.
Really? Okay.
That's when I first began to vaguely and dimly and not altogether accurately understand that there was a problem. Back 40 years ago, I remember writing a magazine article which I called The Alienation of American Catholics. This was shortly after the Supreme Court's abortion decision, and I was talking about the impact that that had had and other developments in American society had had on Catholics like myself, Catholics who stand with the teaching of the Church and were not only appalled by what the Supreme Court had done, but felt themselves somehow strangely alienated from, separated from an emerging new mainstream in American secular life.
You became aware of it.
Yes.
You were probably somewhat surprised and disappointed. Some of your friends, maybe whether they became aware of it or not, didn't have a problem with it. Why didn't you just get absorbed in it, do you think?
I'm sure it had something to do with my upbringing, with my mother in particular, as a matter of fact, who was a very simple and devout Catholic girl from the Midwest. And one thing that she impressed on me, and it was reinforced by my Catholic school education back in those years, was that the teaching and the values of the Roman Catholic Church were true. That sunk deeply into my psyche and into my heart, and I've stuck by that ever since.
Right, exactly. Now, elsewhere, as far as at the same time you're talking about, you worked actually at the USCCB for a number of years, right?
Yes, back
when it was not called that. But
no, it was two organizations,
yeah, right.
Actually, and I worked for both of them. From 1969 to 1987, I was, to put it simply, I was the media relations director for the Bishops' Conference.
Right. So this is in the same period you're thinking about and seeing these things?
Yeah.
Were these feelings being reinforced by what you saw happening up close and personal, so to speak?
I saw the conflict underway, not only out there in the larger society and in the church as a whole, but I saw the conflict going in within the parameters of the Bishops' Conference itself.
Well, how do you see things today in light of what you saw going on? How are they similar? How are they dissimilar today?
On the one hand, the measurable, quantifiable, statistical decline of American Catholicism has continued apace, and in many respects even speeded up since those years. For example, the decline in Sunday Mass attendance has been an ongoing phenomenon for 40 years, and it's only gotten worse as time passed. The decline in priestly and religious vocations is still with us, and we're just starting now to feel the very painful consequences of that. The decline of the Catholic school system and the decline of the Catholic identity of many Catholic colleges and universities, all these things have not only continued but have speeded up and become more serious, so that I believe in fact that American Catholicism is now involved in a long-running but increasingly serious crisis in which who knows what the
serious to what degree?
Serious that while Catholicism is not going to vanish from the United States, the real possibility exists that as a significant cultural factor in American society and as a significant institutional presence in this country, the Church may come close to vanishing.
Now, the foreword to your book was written by Archbishop Charles de Chaput.
A great man.
Great man, a great friend of EWTN for many years on our board. You Shall Be My Witness is the foreword. Now, I think back to his book where he had about Caesar, and Render Under Caesar, I think was the title, and he dealt a lot with Catholicism intersecting with the culture here. So do you think there's a lot of, similar thinking in the sense of what you saw in that book into what you're seeing here?
Oh yes, we're both Archbishop Chaput and I and other reliable observers of American Catholicism are looking at the same facts and drawing the same conclusions. We're all talking about the same phenomenon or the same set of phenomena, but our analyses differ in specifics, and perhaps in some cases our analysis of the future prospects are somewhat different. I think
and you also obviously have a different perspective than someone like an
well, yes, I
Archbishop
can
would
talk
have,
about
right?
I can
From
talk
a lay
about it
position,
as a lay person who also for many years was indeed an insider in the affairs of the church at the national and even international levels. So it's not a unique perspective, but it's an unusual one that I bring to this subject. My book is a little bit different from a lot of other analyses of the problem too, in that I try to trace the historic origins of this problem, this crisis in American Catholicism.
Well, how far back does it go
origins
back?
Which go back, well, to the very start. You can see the ongoing struggle for on the part of American church leaders to find the identity of the church in the American context. You can find that beginning with Archbishop John Carroll, the first American bishop, way back in the late 18th century. But things really picked up and became more and more of an issue for the church and its leaders as time passed in the 19th century, and two major forces raised their heads increasingly, namely Catholic immigration, which began in a big way back in the 1820s, 1830s, and anti-Catholicism, largely in reaction to the immigration of a large number of Catholics from Europe who were arriving in America, and the question was how to assimilate them into American society. So the church has been grappling with this problem of assimilation and the Catholic confrontation with American secular values and what to do about these twin problems for a long time, 150 years at least, 200 years possibly.
Right. Well, there was a sense too, I think, in some Protestant circles that, this was the great Protestant experiment, the United States. And this is what they come to flee from, the Catholics, so to speak.
We were seen as interlopers, not only newcomers, but not very welcome newcomers either at one time.
Right. Exactly. Now you start off, and that's where you start off. Everybody's cardinal's dream. What was everybody's cardinal's dream?
The cardinal in question here is Cardinal James Gibbons of Baltimore. Cardinal Gibbons was the Archbishop of Baltimore for some 40 years, from the late 19th century into the early decades of the 20th century. And during that time, he was recognized as the primate of the American hierarchy, that is, the de facto leader of the American bishops. And as time went by, one of the most influential and respected church leaders in the country. A great friend, for example, of Theodore Roosevelt. They were close buddies, the Cardinal Gibbons and Teddy Roosevelt. The Cardinal made an enormous impact not only on the country but on American Catholicism. And I contend that although he wasn't as flamboyant as some of his colleagues, he was the most effective in his own quiet, diplomatic way in fostering the Americanization of American Catholics, that is to say, in promoting and facilitating the increasing assimilation of these rather recently arrived Catholic newcomers into American secular society. And I must say that back in Cardinal Gibbons' day, this seemed like the right thing to do.
Good thing to do.
Get those immigrant Catholics into the mainstream of American society as fast as you can, and Americanize them to the greatest extent possible. And that's what Cardinal Gibbons stood for, and that was his dream. An American Catholic Church which would be entirely Catholic, but also 100% American.
Right, whose allegiance was to America.
Allegiance
and did not
was
deal
to
with
America.
the bogus oath and allegiance to the Holy Father over everybody else and all of those things. It's like the Knights of Columbus, with their fourth degree having to do with patriotism and everything back there. Is a strong statement about that.
I wanted to call this book originally, and for a long time I did call it The Gibbons Legacy. That's what I was referring to. Cardinal Gibbons and his dream for the American church and for American Catholics, a dream of 100% Catholic and 100% American.
Well, the other name that jumps out at you is Isaac Hecker and the Paulists.
Oh, yes.
When you talk about Americanism.
Yes, yes. Father Hecker, whose canonization cause, in fact, is at some early stage of the process at the present time. He was a good man, a visionary, strongly committed to the idea of evangelizing Protestant America. He thought it could be done, and he wanted to be the man who would do it as leader of this new group called the Paulist Fathers. He also believed that there was a deep and true compatibility between American secular culture and Catholicism. And that's what he worked to persuade his fellow Catholics and the leaders of the church of during his long and influential years as an intellectual and spiritual leader in American Catholicism. He was, you might say, the patron saint of the Americanization of American Catholicism. But he also became a controversial figure. Late in the 19th century, Pope Leo XIII specifically condemned something he called the heresy of Americanism.
Yeah.
And he was talking really about ideas which many people attributed to Father Isaac Hecker, who had been long dead at that time, by the way. Now, it's problematical whether the ideas that the Pope condemned were Father Hecker's ideas or ideas which were later attributed to him by enthusiasts who were going way beyond anything that he dreamt of. But in any case, both in reality and as a symbol of something having to do with assimilation into American democratic ways and ways of thinking, Isaac Hecker stood then and continues to stand something very significant in the history of our church.
Right. Now, you also go into something into and out of the ghetto. Now, is that the Catholic Ghetto?
So it was called. The critics called it a ghetto. I call it a subculture. Whatever you call it, it was a very effective instrumentality, particularly in the early decades of the 20th century and into the middle decades of that century. A very effective instrumentality for preserving the Catholicism of American Catholics, ethnic American Catholics, the Italian Americans, the Polish Americans, and other groups newly arrived here. It was a very effective instrumentality for preserving their religious identity, while at the same time gradually fostering and assisting their assimilation into mainstream American society. It worked. It wasn't perfect. You can look back on it and say, well, we wouldn't want to return to that version of Catholicism. But you're going overboard, I think, if you call it, as some of its critics call it now, a ghetto. It wasn't as bad as that term ghetto suggests. And when I talk about returning to the ghetto, I'm not talking about some kind of literal, returning to a golden era in American Catholicism, which never existed. I'm talking nevertheless about returning to an American Catholicism which is based upon and organized around a strong, healthy, viable Catholic subculture, such as the ethnic Catholicism, the so-called ghetto Catholicism.
And which was really based on having these parishes.
It was a parish-based thing.
Because I know from my relatives, older relatives, the past couple of years growing up in and around New York City, when they grew up as kids, their neighborhood was their parish. And so when somebody would describe from somebody else where you're from, they wouldn't even say what street. They'd say from St. Raymond's or from St. Paul's, or we're over there, and people knew exactly what neighborhood that was.
And it was organized around parishes which themselves, in many, many cases, had a strong and quite particular ethnic identity. Here is the Irish parish. Here is the Italian parish. Over there you have the Polish parish, and so on and so on. You can still see towns and communities not very far from where we're sitting right now, where you can identify the old Ukrainian church and the old Polish church up on the hill.
Yeah, there's an Orthodox Ukrainian church right outside here.
Sure. Yeah. So, and I repeat, it had its drawbacks and it couldn't have lasted forever, but it had real strengths, and would do well, I think, to return to those strengths and the values of that version of Catholicism.
In Chapter 3, A Fearful Modernity, you open up democracy in America. So de Tocqueville's take, is that your take?
Yes, I think de Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville, great French observer of the American democracy in the early 19th century. De Tocqueville was a remarkably far-sighted man. He didn't work it all out in detail, but he saw the main lines along which the United States was likely to develop and did develop. And one area of his analysis is the role of religion in America, which he saw as profoundly significant. He felt that religion did indeed have and was likely to continue to have a very powerful role in American society. But the question which de Tocqueville raised in various ways was whether this would be a religion which would retain its own identity, or whether it would be an accommodationist, assimilated version of religion, which in fact would reflect all of the less desirable values and attitudes of the secular society. And I think that question, which de Tocqueville anticipated in general terms long, long ago, is now right at the fore of American religious life and American Catholic life today.
Right, it says here, Tocqueville nevertheless concluded that the churches were not as robust as they first appeared. So that kind of ties into what you just said.
Yes, they were in danger of being co-opted by a secular something which was not friendly to religion.
Right. In your A Fearful Modernity on 125, you talk about the culture of dissent and what else is at the top. First thing, number one, Humanae Vitae.
Oh yes. I lived through all that. In a small way, I was a participant in that debate. By the way, I made up my mind about Humanae Vitae and the contraception issue before Humanae Vitae was published, and I stood with the Pope, and I still stand with the Pope on that. But unquestionably, the reaction against Humanae Vitae, a largely engineered reaction, which didn't occur just spontaneously, but we were set up for it for a long time.
Well, because many people were told way ahead it was going to change, it's going to change, it's going to change. So people started to believe it was going to change.
People naturally were disappointed and angry when things didn't change. Well, that was the catalyst, I think, for dissent to really erupt as a popular phenomenon in American Catholicism. It had been there for a long time, before 1968, before Humanae Vitae.
I'm sorry, somebody you know, Charles Curran, I'm sure you
Oh
must
yes,
know
Father
Charles
Curran, who was representative of that whole school. God bless him. Anyway, Humanae Vitae was the turning point, and we aren't out of the woods on that one yet, are we?
Well, it always strikes me as interesting is that one could argue that one could have differing opinions at the time and maybe have thought it was this way or the other way. But looking back retrospectively, whether you liked the decision or you didn't like the decision, it was the correct decision in the sense that it's totally prophetic about everything that was warned would happen has happened.
Oh, sure. Another prophet, like de Tocqueville, Paul VI could see prophetically what was going to happen if we attempted to legitimize contraception. It has indeed happened, and we're paying the price for it right now.
Let me jump ahead. What was the worst year ever?
Not everyone would agree, but for me, 1976. If you're talking about
what, the Bicentennial?
Post-conciliar American Catholicism, 1976, the year of the Bicentennial, which brought to the surface the very serious split, the divisions within American Catholicism and within the ranks of the American hierarchy. I was working in those years for the American bishops, and I could see it all. 1976, you will recall, was the year of, two significant events in American Catholicism, at least two. One was a Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia, organized by Cardinal John Kroll, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, which was a strong and successful expression of traditional Orthodox Catholicism, Eucharistic devotion and faith in the Blessed Sacrament. It was a great event. Then a little after the Eucharistic Congress, we had a second and very different kind of national event under the auspices of the Bishops' Conference, God Save the Mark. That was the Call to Action Conference out in Detroit, which again was an engineered event. It was manipulated by people who had a particular agenda, and the agenda was the liberal, social, and religious agenda of a certain group within American Catholicism. If the Call to Action Conference accomplished anything good, I think it was to wake up a lot of American bishops and other American Catholics to the rot, if you will, which had already entered into the church and was spreading rather rapidly at that time. But, so that was 1976. A lot of other things happened in 1976.
To live in Christ Jesus?
To Live in Christ Jesus was a pastoral letter on morals published by the bishops. I was the staff man principally responsible for working with the bishops' committee, chaired by a wonderful, wonderful auxiliary bishop of Pittsburgh named John McDowell. Bishop McDowell and his committee, with the assistance of a few of the rest of us, came up with a pretty good document called To Live in Christ Jesus, which reiterated, but tried to put it in up-to-date and pastoral terms, the moral teaching of the Church on a lot of issues, including contraception and homosexuality. It's still a readable document, and I'd commend it to anyone who could get hold of it. It's not a bad summary of the Church's traditional moral teaching. But because it was a state restatement of traditional moral teaching, there were forces within the Church and within the Bishops' Conference who tried to torpedo it and did their best to bring about, what shall I say, bring about the destruction of that document and its replacement with a slightly liberal-tinged document on morality. Well, those fellows didn't succeed, and I'm glad they didn't succeed. We got the original and orthodox pastoral letter passed, but it was a tough fight, and the fight itself was illustrative of what was going on in the church generally.
Well, I saw a name related to that where the comment, but the damage was done, conservative Catholic activist Monsignor George A. Kelly later he wrote The Battle for the American Church.
Kelly was a courageous man who understood very well what was going on.
I did a two-part TV interview with him just months before he died.
Did you?
Yeah, he was such a great man.
He was a great man. And if you want to know what was happening back in those years, those very, very difficult years of the 70s on into the 80s, George Kelly's book is still the book to read.
Yeah. Its section on the Catholic higher education, there's a subhead talking about a document here that said, why Barack Obama represents American Catholics better than the Pope does. Now, they may not say that about Pope Francis, but they said it obviously about Pope Benedict. Might be closer in their minds. Anyway.
It's what they believe.
Right.
Some of them.
Well, one of the things too that struck me that you had written in here, it was talking about the clerical scandal, right? Under A Fearful Modernity, it says, as the facts of this scandal have come to light, it's become clear that in combination with other mistaken attitudes and ways of acting, the attitudes and ways associated with clericalism, I know this has been a concern of yours in other works, usually played a large part in the response when a priest was found to have engaged in abuse. His bishop and other clerics hushed up what had happened to prevent scandal that was said, quote unquote, shielded and sequestered the offender and in general behaved like members of an exclusive club.
Yes. I don't believe that clericalism caused clerical sexual abuse. Obviously, that would be ridiculous to say that. But the argument I'm making there is that clericalism was a serious and large contributing factor in the development of the scandals surrounding the abuse in this way, and in at least two ways. First of all, it led many bishops, good bishops and religious superiors, in effect to side with the priest, to take the side of the offending priest and protect him at all costs, including kind of ignoring and neglecting the enormous damage done to the victims of abuse. That happened over and over, and a shocking part of this particular scandal. The other way in which I think clericalism played a significant and very destructive role in the development of the sex abuse scandal was by encouraging secrecy, cover-up, sweep it under the rug and don't let anybody know about it. That was the club mentality, right. The clerical club mentality at work. Keep it within our own ranks and don't let others know about it, even if others are going right. to be hurt from not knowing.
The other aspect that you continue on, it has to do, you talk about the abuse having linked to power. I thought this was really interesting. Again, clericalism, similarly linked. At the start, generosity moves men to pursue a calling to the priesthood, but in some, it seems the generous impulse comes to be corrupted by a growing taste for the pleasures of unearned authority. Probably in no other walk of life, remarks priest narrator Edwin O'Connor in the novel The Edge of Sadness, as a young man so often and so humbly approached by his elders and asked for his advice. Such deference can be an exceedingly dangerous trap.
Indeed, yes, and that's clericalism at work. Clericalism which corrupts good men by subjecting them to right. something that no one should be subjected to, namely a foolish degree of deference and subservience. They get accustomed to it, right. And that leads in time to, what shall I say, the serious weakening of their own vocation and great harm to the Catholic community.
We're out of time, but another book in the works?
One of these days, maybe.
I'm sure you'll
like to write a book.
I'd like to see you a little more often. I don't get to see you that much. Great, Russ. Great
Good
to
be
see
with you.
Speaking here on location at the Catholic Marketing Network with Russell Shaw, author of American Church, The Remarkable Rise, Meteoric Fall, and Uncertain Future of Catholicism in America, published by Ignatius Press, a very good read. Check it out. It's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you for joining us on location at the Catholic Marketing Network.